One of the wildest and, frankly, most terrifying stories in history. It's about how a single private company, driven by profit, managed to conquer an entire subcontinent. This isn't your usual story of kings and empires. This is a corporate takeover on a scale that is just mind-boggling. I mean, seriously, think about that question. How does that even happen? This wasn't a country invading another country. This was a business, a corporation, that ended up ruling over millions. And it all started not with some grand declaration of war, but with a very simple and very powerful motive: money. That's right, the whole thing wasn't hatched in a palace or a war room. It was the brainchild of a couple dozen businessmen in London who were ticked off about the price of pepper. This is the story of how the line between a corporate balance sheet and a bloody battlefield just completely vanished. Okay, so let's get into it. To really get how this happened, you have to picture late 16th century London. The entire global economy, the thing that made the world turn, was all about getting your hands on some flavor. Before we had oil or data, the most valuable thing on the planet was spice. And in Europe, black pepper was the absolute king. They called it black gold for a reason. It was literally as valuable as gold. It was the only way to keep meat from going bad, and it made terrible food actually edible. If you controlled the spices, you controlled a staggering amount of wealth. So, in September 1599, these 24 merchants get together. They're fed up with paying sky-high prices to Dutch and Portuguese traders. They said, you know what? Let's cut out the middleman. They pooled their money and decided to sail to the east themselves. And just over a year later, on New Year's Eve, 1600, the Queen gave them the go-ahead. Now, check this out. The permission the Queen gave them, this royal charter, it wasn't just a business license. It was basically a nation-building kit for a private company. It gave them the power to print their own cash, write their own laws, have their own courts, and, this is the big one, to raise their own private army. This is the moment a corporation was given the power of a government. So, armed with this absolutely insane charter, the new East India Company set sail. But their path from being simple traders to becoming conquerors wasn't a straight line. It was forged in failure, and it made them absolutely ruthless. Right off the bat, they tried to get into the Spice Islands in Indonesia, but they got their clocks cleaned by their Dutch rivals, who were already there. They were totally humiliated. But getting kicked out just made them meaner, more aggressive. So they turned their ships toward the biggest economic powerhouse on the planet at the time, Mughal, India, a place that was producing almost a quarter of everything made in the world. And you can see their whole strategy just flip. At first, they show up all humble, begging the Mughal emperor for permission to trade, bringing fancy gifts. But when that proves too slow, they switch tactics. They start using force. A big naval victory in 1612 showed everyone they could fight. And pretty soon, they stopped asking for warehouses and started building fortresses. The friendly merchant mask was starting to come off. Now, these early moves were really just the warm-up act. They were setting the stage for the company's real target, the one place that would bankroll their entire imperial dream, the province of Bengal. It is almost impossible to overstate how rich Bengal was. Think of it like this. Its farms were incredibly fertile, and its textile industry, well, its silks and muslins were famous across the globe. For the company, this wasn't just another port. This was the jackpot. So how did they get it? Well, not by an honest fight. They used a corporate playbook. Step 1, get a tax-free deal that basically bankrupts all your local competition. Step 2, when the local ruler, a young guy named Siraj-ud-Dowlah, tries to stand up to you, don't declare war. No, a company man named Robert Clive orchestrates a conspiracy. He finds the Nawab's top general and bribes him with the throne. Just look at this chart. It shows you what a complete joke the so-called Battle of Plassey was. The company had 3,000 soldiers. The Nawab had 50,000. It should have been an absolute slaughter. But it wasn't a real battle. It was a business deal. The trader general, Mir Jafar, just stood his armies down, and the company walked right in and took over. And what Clive did next was pure evil genius. He puts the trader on the throne as a puppet and sets up this system. The company gets the right to collect all the taxes, all the money, but has zero responsibility for actually running the government. So all the cash goes to the company's shareholders, while the local ruler gets all the blame when things go wrong. It's a perfect scam. Okay, so with the entire treasury of India's richest province in its pocket, the East India Company basically evolves. It's not a trading firm anymore, it's a ravenous corporate state, and it starts using Bengal's money to fund the conquest of the rest of India. 10 million. That is the number of people estimated to have died in the Bengal famine of 1770, just a few years after the company took over. And this wasn't just a drought. It was made so much worse because the company was hoarding grain to drive up prices. As millions of people were starving to death, the company actually raised their taxes. Their expansion plan was methodical, like a hostile takeover. First, take out your biggest competitors. Crush powerful rulers like Tipu Sultan. Then, once the big threats are gone, you switch to legal tricks. They invented something called the Doctrine of Lapse, which was basically a legal loophole that let them seize any kingdom where the ruler died without a son. It was conquest by paperwork. For 100 years, the company had bled India dry with violence, corruption, and these predatory policies. But you can only push people so far. A century of rage was about to explode into a fire that would burn the company to the ground. The final straw, the thing that lit the fuse, was a new rifle cartridge. To load their rifles, the Indian soldiers, the sepoys, had to bite the cartridge open. But a rumor spread like wildfire that the grease on the cartridges was made from cow and pig fat. This was deeply offensive to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. On May 10th, 1857, they had enough, and they rose up in rebellion. The rebellion was huge, and it was brutal. It spread all across northern India, led by heroes like Rani Lakshmibai of Jhansi. In the end, the company, with the help of the official British Army, managed to crush it, but the damage was done. The rebellion proved once and for all that a for-profit corporation was not capable of governing an empire. The whole thing had just gotten too big, too bloody. Now here's the crucial part. The rebellion didn't lead to India's freedom. The British government just stepped in, said, "Okay, you guys messed up," and dissolved the company. It was basically just a change in management. The corporate state was replaced by a colonial one, the British Raj. The looting of India just became more official. $45 trillion. Let that number sink in for a second. That's a modern estimate for how much wealth was drained out of India during the entire period of British rule, a period that was started by the company. It's a number so big it's hard to comprehend, and it goes a long way to explaining the global inequality we still see today. And it all ends with this one last incredible twist of irony. In 2005, what was left of the East India Company, which at that point was just a brand selling luxury teas, was bought by an Indian entrepreneur. The company that once owned India was now owned by an Indian. You know, the story of the East India Company is so much more than just a history lesson. It's a warning. It's a chilling example of what happens when the pursuit of profit is completely separated from morality, and when a corporation becomes more powerful than a country. It forces us to ask a really important question. In our own time, where do we draw the line? Thanks for watching.